Australian guy who was on the inside before, David Evans, full-time, part-time consultant with the Australian Greenhouse Office, now the Department of Climate Change. He said that the debate about global warming has reached crazy proportions. Interesting what he says. The theory was based on a guess that was proved false by empirical evidence during the 1990s, but the gravy train, $1.5 trillion a year, was too big, and with too many jobs, industries, trading profits, political careers, and the possibility of world government and total control riding on the outcome. Here we go. Evans said that the governments and their tame climate scientists now outrageously maintain the friction that carbon dioxide is a dangerous pollutant, rather than admit that they are wrong, even though the evidence is overwhelming. And there we go, the possibility of world government. This is Agenda 21, 2030, which I'll come to shortly. Well-known French weather forecaster wrote a book saying, global warming, what? Sacked. The founder of the Weather Channel, global warming is a nonsense. And if you put these words, how the global warming scare began, into YouTube, you'll see a video which is explaining how it came about. And this is the Orwellian language. You're a scientist who supports climate change, you're a scientist and a climate expert. If you expose it, you're a skeptic and a denier. And now, they're talking about making it a criminal offence to deny climate change caused by human activity. Extraordinary. He wants, I think they call him a tosser in our part. He's a media climate guy or science guy. They may need to be jailed. Al Gore using McCarthy-style tactics to criminalise climate change critics, on it goes. And the BBC just virtually censor any alternative to the official line. And then, fracking, which releases greenhouse gases, is no problem. This is Scientific American. Fracking would emit large quantities of greenhouse gases. They're not bothered because they know they don't matter. The reason is there's contradiction. Apparently, it's not a contradiction because this stops it being a contradiction. Global warming relief is good. Fracking is good. So we'll have fracking even though it releases greenhouse gases. Nikola Tesla, who gave us basically our modern electrical networks, was understanding, he died penniless in a New York hotel room in 1943 because he understood that you can access electromagnetic power in the atmosphere and turn it into usable warmth and power once you've got the technology without cost. The very people who were saying we must transform society because of global warming are the ones that are suppressing the very technology that he created and we could be using now. He said, all peoples everywhere should have free electricity sources. Electric power is everywhere present in unlimited quantities and can drive the world's machinery without the need for coal, oil and gas. So what we're having now is the education, the indoctrination of children. The UN this week have adopted this plan to indoctrinate children in schools all over the world into believing this bollocks. And they've even got this song, a children's song about saving us from global warming, which includes the line, "We don't need no CO2. Give it a frickin' try, man. See what happens. So, how do we get there? Agenda 21, 2030. Which is being driven through the United Nations. And this is Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 is similar but a bit more advanced. This is what they want, an international sovereignty, here we go. State planning and management of all land resources, ecosystems, deserts, forests, mountains and all the rest. And ensuring equality, which means, or equity, which means equal slavery. The state to define the role of business and financial resources. Abolition of private property is unsustainable, apparently. Restructuring the family unit, children raised by the state, people told what their job will be, major restrictions on movement, creation of human settlement zones, mass resettlement as people are forced to vacate land where they live, dumbing down education, mass global depopulation in pursuit of all the above. And then comes Agenda 21 on steroids, called Agenda 2030. And what they do, they sell it in ways that appear to be good. They talk about sustainability and all this stuff, but that's just to hide the real meaning of it all. So, what it means to achieve sustainability is the central control of everything. Everything. So, here we go, zero hunger. They could give a shit about zero hunger. I mean, look at the world, what are they doing? What that means is the central control of all food using the excuse of zero hunger. Dr. Richard Day, 1969. Food supplies will come under tight control, food shortages could be created in a hurry, and people would realise the dangers of overpopulation. Ultimately, whether the population slows down or not, food supply is to be brought under centralised control so that people would have enough to be well nourished, but they would not have enough to support any fugitive of the new system. In other words, if you had a friend or relative who didn't sign on and growing one's own food would be outlawed, this would be done under some sort of pretext. In the beginning, I mentioned, said the doctor reporting this, Lawrence Dunnigan, I mentioned that there were two purposes for everything. One, the ostensible purpose, and one, the real purpose. And the ostensible purpose here would be that growing your own vegetables was unsafe, it would spread disease or something like that. So the acceptable idea was to protect the consumer, but the real idea was to limit the food supply, and growing your own food would be illegal. We're seeing, using zoning laws, the banning of people growing their own food in North America particularly, disappearing allotments, this constant attack by the state on small farms, organic farms, and small holdings. 1913, corn is 100% farmer-owned. 2013, 95% owned by corporations and 90% GMO in the United States. Kissinger, control the food and you control nations, control food and you control the people. And so we come to something even more important for sustaining life and food, water. Clean water and sanitation. How do you create that? You have centralised control of all water supplies, and it is happening. In states in America now, they're picking them off more and more, they are claiming the right, the state, to own all water, including that falling from the sky and creating puddles. That puddle is now owned by the state in places like Oregon. Snow melts and stuff. Court ends private property rights, all water to be controlled by the government. The new water barons, Wall Street mega banks, are buying the world's water. Nestle, it's not a human right, even though you'll die if you don't have it, it should be privatised. The Nestle control town's groundwater for up to 45 years, and they're trying to do it all over Nestle. Member of the Congress just issued a warning to the World Bank, stop privatising water. This is Agenda 21, 2030 unfolding. Sustainable communities. This sounds good, let's have sustainable communities. Except that it means clearing the land of people and putting them into human settlement zones, which I'll come to in a second. This is a map created by the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, Wildlands Project, and these other groups, of America, in effect under Agenda 21, 2030. The red areas are little to no human use. The yellow areas, highly regulated use. Only the green areas are normal human use. Imagine the population of America, how that would have to fall to bring that about. America 2050, that's a Rockefeller organisation. The Agenda 21 depopulation of rural areas has begun. The idea is to get people into these human settlement zones and off the land. And a few years ago now, between 2005 and 2010, we crossed the point where people in urban areas, and it's gone on rising, were the greater part of the global population, all according to this plan. 1930s, nearly 50% living in rural areas, 21% worked in farming. 2016, 20% of the population is rural, only 2% working in farming. This is in the United States. And they're abandoning farms all over the place because they've been put out of business. We've got the Bureau of Land Management in America, which is literally burning people out of their homes and burning cattle alive to force people off the land. And they did it in Oregon, and then Obama signed this executive order, no debate, legalizing them to take over any land they want. Worldwide destruction of the family farm, and these major corporations are buying it out when they're forced off. Everywhere you're seeing this self-sufficiency disappearing. And this was a big story at one point. Battle for the California desert. Why is the government driving folks off the land? It's like, what are they doing? Context? Ah, that's why they're doing it. And one of the other ways they're getting people off the land and destroying farms and small farms is through weather control. They're now admitting it when they want to, that they are manipulating the weather. Nations are now using weather modifications as clandestine warfare, CIA warns. What it doesn't say is they've been doing it for decades. And this guy is involved with this organisation manipulating the weather, not least through sulphur in the clouds. Now, in 2001, a BBC radio documentary exposed that the disaster at Lynmouth in North Devon in 1952 that killed 35 people, when there were unprecedented rains and fantastic tidal wave came down the river and killed people and destroyed the village, that was actually done by the RAF, using then primitive methods of seeding rain in the clouds, which then produced that disaster. So they've been doing it since then. This is 1996. It's a US Air Force document describing the artificial creation of floods, hurricanes, droughts and earthquakes. And it goes on, weather modification will become a part of domestic and international security and could be done unilaterally. It could have offensive and defensive applications and even be used for deterrence purposes. The ability to generate precipitation, fog, storms and earth, and to modify space weather and the production of artificial weather are all part of an integrated set of military technologies. And this is Richard Day in 1969. He worked on weather modification during the Second World War. There was a mention then of weather. This was another really striking statement. He said, we can or soon will be able to control the weather. He said, I'm not merely referring to dropping iodide crystals into the clouds to precipitate rain that's already there, but real control. And weather was seen as a weapon of war, a weapon of influencing public policy. It could make rain or withhold rain in order to influence certain areas and bring them under your control. There were two sides to this that were rather striking. He said, on the one hand, you can make drought during the growing season so that nothing will grow, and on the other hand, you can make for very heavy rains during harvest season so the fields are too muddy to bring in the harvest. And indeed, one might be able to do both. There was no statement how this would be done. It was stated that either it was already possible or very, very close to being possible in 1969. Now we've got technology like HAARP that fire radio waves, high-powered radio waves into the ionosphere and the upper atmosphere and bounce them back, which is a massive weather manipulator, even manipulator of earthquakes. And these ionosphere heaters are now being coming into place around the world. And these strange weather things that we've had, not just in Britain but in America, lots of rain or massive droughts, have been blamed on the strange behaviour of what is called the jet stream, which is where we get our weather systems from. This is Bernard Eastland, and he talked about HAARP, which is in Alaska in America, but like I say, they're around the world now more and more. He said when he wrote the patents for HAARP, which was based on Tesla technology, and he said so. So they'll use it when it suits them, they won't use it when it don't suit them. He said HAARP can steer the jet stream. And that is what's been blamed by the weather industry on these strange weather patterns. Simple. Flood the land, put them out of business, take the land. Dry the land, put them out of business, take the land. And that's what's happening. And then this is the extra bonus, you blame it on frickin' climate change. And what is happening is these major companies, and him too, Soros, have been buying up this land as people are forced off it. Fracking, get them off the land. Whenever something comes out of nowhere, and is everywhere very quickly, big alarm bells. And fracking came from nowhere, and now it's everywhere. And what is it doing? For a start, it's pouring vast numbers of chemicals in water into the ground to break it up, to fracture it, to get the gas and the oil. And then this polluted, chemically charged water is going into the groundwater supplies that people have to drink. That's why, you know, they've been able to set water taps on fire. What happens when there's no water supply left because fracking's destroyed it? You have to get off the land and relocate. That's what it's about. Control the water and you control the people. This was Oklahoma when fracking started in terms of earthquakes. Look at it. No cause and effect. Fracking, get them off the land. And so we come to sustainable communities. Where do these people go once you get them off the land? They go into these human settlement zones, as these documents call them. What they are densely packed, high-rise skyscrapers, but incredibly small in terms of the living space. Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, instigated 165,000 units in New York under this Agenda 21-2030. And these yellow lines are the two walls with which people are expected to live. They are 10 feet by 30 feet, while he lives in mansions all over the world. This is the idea. These are micro apartments in Manhattan. City officials, developers recommend coffin apartments for the middle class. Rabbit Hutch Britain, growing health concerns as UK sets record for smallest properties in Europe. And the idea is to force people into these human settlement zones where they can be under surveillance 24/7. This is Richard Day. Privately owned housing would become a thing of the past. The cost of housing and financing housing would be gradually be made so high that most people couldn't afford it. Young people would be more and more become renters, particularly in apartments and condominiums. People would not be able to buy homes, and gradually more and more of the population would be forced into small apartments. It's happening! Small apartments which would not accommodate many children. Young give up hope of ever buying home. The court warns Generation Rent face a lifetime in instability because they are unable to afford prices. For the average American, owning a home is increasingly unaffordable. Day again. Ultimately, this is where they wanted to go. Ultimately, people would be assigned where they would live, exactly in line with that list of Agenda 21, and it would be common to have non-family members living with you. This, by the way, if you're not knowing just how far you can trust anybody. This would all be under the control of the Central Housing Authority. Have this in mind. When 1969 he said this, have this in mind. When they ask how many bedrooms in your house, how many bathrooms in your house, do you have a finished games room? This information is personal and is of no national interest to government under our existing constitution, but you'll be asked those questions. Exactly what has happened. Okay, how do we get there? Number 11, we weaken and mutate the population. The Fabian Society, which